Good morning, Patreon. We often wonder, guess, speculate about what SHTF might look like. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions on the subject. But right now, and for the last several years, in a little place called Venezuela, they've been going through it. And so I was reading the article headlines at Drudge this morning, and I clicked over to one on Breitbart called My Socialist Hell Living in Post-Electricity Venezuela. And the reason I bring this up is because modern society is just so heavily predicated on the flow of electrons. All of us, myself included, we are all to one degree or another, if you're watching this video, dependent to one degree or another on the flow of electrons. And so I was reading this article thinking about area study and critical infrastructure. And so I just wanted to just kind of go through a couple of things in this article and, talk about it with y'all. So there it is. The article is on Breitbart, My Socialist Hell, Living in Post-Electricity Venezuela, by Christian K. Caruso, 10 November 2019. I don't know when you'll see this video, but nearish. And so the author talks about Venezuela and its storied issues with power grid and blackouts and blah, 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 92, 96, and then the collapse March 7, 2019. The entire country was thrown into Middle Ages in a snap. I went 30 hours without power, power returned for approximately 12 hours, then another 30-hour blackout. And of course, Maduro blamed America. Blah, 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 blah. Caracas felt like a ghost town. You couldn't hear a single thing, not even gunfire and car alarms, quintessential sounds that one often hears throughout the night. It was as if we were collectively going through a bizarre mass solitary confinement. Water distribution was disrupted. People desperately sought for it, even in sewer drains. Let's stop right there for a minute. So with what we do as, survivalists, as preppers, as, us, when it comes to critical infrastructure, we want to be looking at things like the grid, the water, the facilities, the people that run those facilities, the food to feed those people, water for those people, fuel, electricity, obviously, transportation, commerce, commo, the internet. Where do these things live in your area, or where do they come from, and how is that going to affect you? So in this case, no water. Why is there no water? Well, in the vast majority of major cities, water's pumped in with electric pumps, and it's, it can be put into pressure vessels, or it can be put into basically stand pipes, water towers. To use hydraulic pressure, they pump it. Yeah, let's see. We'll use some hops gun oil. They pump it up into the top of the tower, and then all that gravity forces the water down out of a pipe out of the bottom of the tower that gives you water pressure. Well, if there's no electricity to run the pumps, there's no water pressure after a given period of time. So the implication here for us is you should have water. And so whether that's water storage, which I believe you should have, rainwater collection, which I believe you should have. I'm not there here yet, but the moment it's above 9 degrees, we will begin seriously considering rainwater collection again. We have redundancy in our wells. We have 3 wells, and this coming spring, one of our goals is to get solar on our wells. And then we have 3 creeks and actually a spring back in the woods that I have found. And we have a stock tank. So We got 3 wells, 3 creeks, a spring, a stock tank, water storage, and we're working on rainwater collection, and we have city water. That's 10, 10 different ways to get water off property. I'm still kind of about water. You just use so much of it. I did recommend 3 gallons per person per day, 1 for washing, 1 for cooking, 1 for cleaning. After repeatedly deploying 6 times in 10 months for disaster relief, it looks more like 5 gallons per person per day. So, and we're talking a sponge bath, 5 gallons per person per day. So do the math. You know, if you got 5 people in your family, it's 25 gallons a day. And that's amortized because you might not use 5 gallons per person per day every day, but there's going to be days you use a lot more than that. And so 25 gallons per family per day, 30 days in a month, that's 750 gallons of water in a month. A lot of water. It's 9,000 gallons in a year. Where's that coming from? Right? And so that's something to consider, because otherwise you're going to put yourself in a situation where you're taking undue risk to go find water. You're exposing yourself to risk. You got to go out there in the world to go get water when you could have had it right here where you're sitting. So, you know, you subject yourself to the redneck with the sniper fantasy who's 3 feet inside the tree line, 200 meters from your position, who's like, man, the world has ended and I'm going to get some, or whatever, or the thugs, or the, you know, MS-13, or the local busybody in the on the neighborhood HOA community board, blah 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 blah. Right? So water, telecommunications as well. Back to the article, we were essentially disconnected from the world. We couldn't even access our money since the banking network was offline. In Zulia, all hell broke loose. Let's take this one step at a time. Telecom is down. Okay. These are just the ones near me. So, not bragging, but you've got 8 radios sitting here within arm's length and another 20 plus distributed amongst systems elsewhere, of various degrees of power and capability. But I have them, and I'm getting better every day at using them. And so once again, we come back to commo. If there's no electricity, there's no centralized communication, and the ability to talk matters, because if you're working in a coordinated effort with others, you're going to have a higher likelihood of success. And those others don't have to be your tribe, your team, your mag. They could be your wife, your husband, your grown children, your grandpa, your whatever. The ability to communicate is vital. And so having commo matters. So if you don't have commo, you really should consider commo. And it doesn't have to be, you can get started with one of these. It's just a Baofeng. This whole, actually with the improved antennas, this is like 40 bucks. So, and then you go down the rabbit hole from there. But the ability to communicate inside of your team and outside of your team, and to monitor other communications, monitor repeaters that people are talking across, and weather stations, and blah 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 blah, really matters from an intel gathering standpoint. So the next thing that happens here in this article is he says, We couldn't even access our money since the banking network was offline. Y'all know I'm a big fan of physical wealth, and I like small denomination physical silver as a barter item, but I also firmly believe that the vast majority of people aren't going to have small denomination silver as a bartering item. And so, excuse me, I use physical metal, precious metal, as a wealth preservation tool much more than I use it as a bartering and trade item. However, I do believe that after the balloon goes up, that you will see little trading posts, and that, little stores and little towns will continue to function to the degree that they can. If their supply chain logistics are even remotely operable, to the degree that they can, they will continue to function. And so there has to be a denomination for trade there, whether it's 2 chickens for, whatever, a case of Keystone or whatever, right? So I do like, hypothetically, small denominational silver, because I don't want to be taking a 1 kilogram bar and a file or a hacksaw and making a piece to give to somebody. I'd rather have a fifth of an ounce or a tenth of an ounce or a 1 ounce silver piece that I can give away in trade for something. But it also implies the access to their money. They had what would be, in my opinion, too much money in the bank. If you know the system is crashing, get your money out of the system. Um, well, into what? Greenbacks? What are they going to be worth? Well, what are they worth now? The only reason they're worth anything is because we've all agreed implicitly or explicitly that there's some value to these things. When that some value goes away, I'd rather have something that I can lay my hands on that has actual value. Um, so if the system's crashing, get your money out. We don't keep a whole bunch of money in the bank. We keep enough money to pay our bills, pretty much in a monthly cycle, and then that's it. We have some in savings elsewhere, but if things started looking really bad financially, that would be one of the first things we would do, is pull that out, because I want access to my money. And I don't keep a lot of money in savings per se, because A, we don't have a ton of money, and B, what I do want to have longevity is going into precious metals. It's not going into a bank account to earn a 0.5% interest. That's ridiculous. Um, so they didn't have access to their money. So you should have access to your money, or your wealth, I would say, and the ability to buy, sell, trade. So back to the article, after the longest blackout in Venezuelan history, power continues to be erratic. The power had scarcely recovered before a second series of long blackouts hit the country toward the end of March. Power, internet, and cell phone reception continues to be unstable. So we talk repeatedly here about decentralization, your power generation. What are you doing to be independent from the power grid? Short answer here is we haven't gotten there yet, but man, we plan to. But we have redundancy, we have electrical stuff and mechanical stuff. We have an electric meat grinder and a mechanical wheat grinder. We have just all the things. We have electric heat and wood heat. Um, so we definitely plan to get a solar array going in the springtime. But in the meanwhile, if the grid was to go down, we'd probably go up to grandma's house. I'd leave a contingent here at our house, but we'd probably go up to grandma's house, which is, 300 yards away. That'd be a pretty rough bug out. Go out and stay out, I should say, just to consolidate resources and labor and manpower. But anyway, point being, we need to step away from this grid. Use Venezuela as a lesson, because when electricity stops flowing, everything else stops flowing. Um, this is part of our area study, critical infrastructure. I mean, it's a big deal, and the this is what I did as a contractor, was the development and defense of critical infrastructure, mainly the United States electrical grid. And it's not robust. It's not. And we hear all the time people say, I want a smart grid. No. I want the dumbest grid possible. I want it all completely analog, bolted and riveted together, and that if something breaks, Jim's got to get in his truck and drive for 4 hours to figure out where it's broken. Because that creates localized outages, not regional or national outages. When everything's smart and it all talks to each other, all it takes is one Russian hacker to hack that network, the SCADA system, and start crashing terminals. And now we've got issues, major issues, cascading issues. And then that smart technology that's been implemented over top of dumb technology that's too dumb to not know to stop producing power to continue to blow itself up becomes, you get cascading effects, and that's a really bad problem. So instead of localized nuts and bolts outages that can be maybe more slowly identified but just as easily repaired, we get regional or national outages that, yeah, we identified them really quick, but they're going to take just as much time and effort to repair, if not more, because the dumb grid, once it loses its smart capability, continues to break itself. I don't know how much more about all that I can say without delving into areas that are outside the purview of this discussion. But you need a way to be independent from all of that, because when we're doing our threat analysis in our area study, think about just the irregular threats, not just the regular threats. The regular threats are going to be people who wear uniforms who are coming out to either fix the grid or defend the grid, or the resources and infrastructure that are tied to the grid. But the irregular threat of gangs, looters, insurgents, guerrillas, who are all now vying for resources that were recently flowing and flowing readily and now aren't, so somebody's got to do something about it, right? And it could be as simple as getting shot by a sniper as you're going to go get water. Well, that sucks. And that's a big reason, a big contributing factor as to why we live where we live, because that's going to be much less of an issue here than it will be in, Boston or Providence or, Kansas City or, I mean, pick a city, any city, Prescott, Arizona. Um, right. And so the lack of an electrical grid represents what's called a disruptive threat. But that disruptive threat creates conventional threats, people who wear uniforms, and irregular threats, people who don't. Um, so you really want to look at what can break and what are your vulnerabilities as these things break. Um, See, here in Venezuela, they're still rationing water. They're rationing electricity. There's some pictures in this article that are pretty ridiculous. Um, the government attributed the initial rationing to a drought period that has long passed, a weak attempt to mask a service clearly in a shoddy state of management and disrepair. Like everything else, even the lies produced by socialism are low quality. As for the quality of water, when it does finally appear, that leaves much to be desired as well, which is why I always implore people that if they have to visit Venezuela, they shouldn't drink tap water under any circumstances. Like the power failures, instead of fixing the water distribution problems, the regime came up with an overly complicated water ration schedule, so complex that they don't even follow it themselves. According to that schedule, we should get water 5 days a week, some days during the morning, other days during the night. Want to take bets whether that's true? For the past 3 years, the area I live in only gets running water from Wednesday evening until Sunday morning. Sometimes it doesn't arrive until Thursday or even Friday, but you can surely be certain that it's gone before noon on Sunday. The rest of the days, we go by the building We go by the building's small water tank. It's not large. It's not a large one, so we have to use it sparingly, only 2 hours per day. My biological clock is now based around our water rations. I need to be ready before 8 p.m. because that's when we have exactly 1 hour to use the toilet, shower, refill buckets, and do dishes. There have been several times when we've run out of water. When that happens, we have to rely on an even smaller tank that's meant for fire emergencies. A knack for puzzle solving and boundless creativity are invaluable perks in my limited skill set arsenal, perks that I have to constantly employ to survive in whatever is left of this country. One of my intelligent solutions to our water woes involves placing a bucket at the end of my air conditioner's water pipe, slowly filling it overnight until, voila, extra toilet flush that refills itself. Following the severe shortages, I mean, right there, one of our, and this video is going long, so I'll put a bow on it here in a minute. But one of our protocols is, man, once the running water stops, ours or the cities or anybody else's, we're shifting to composting toilets. And that's pretty easy to set up for now. Basically, you make a bucket with a seat, and you need some kind of medium, whether it's sawdust or compost or whatever, and you use the bucket. And here's, if you really want a trick, you keep your liquids separate from your solids, and if you do that, the two aren't intermingling and producing ammonia, which is what creates all that smell. But as long as you're keeping all that covered anyway, you're greatly reducing the smell. It's a game of carbon. It's the reason why you add wood chips to your chicken houses, because the carbon in the wood neutralizes the odor and it neutralizes everything else that's there, and then they both start to break down, and guess what? You've got humanure. Now, humanure needs to sit for a year before you use it on your gardens, on your anything else, and you need to keep it away from your water sources. But having an idea now of where you're going to dig a latrine or where you can build an outhouse, or maybe there's a corner of your shed that you can hang a shower curtain in, and you can make a little bench with a toilet seat on it and put a couple of buckets underneath it and have a stack of peat moss bricks or compressed sawdust or wood shaving bricks in there, and there's your composting toilet. That you're not wasting water to flush a toilet. Because that water could be purified through boiling or treating or filtering, and use that for cooking, cleaning, sanitation, drinking, food preparation, blah, 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 blah. So, back to the article. If 3 years of rigorous water rationing wasn't enough, the collapse of our power grid made it all right. Worse. I'm writing this paragraph amidst a widespread water shortage. The nation's water pumps can't function without power, and they require lots of it. The constant blackouts have disrupted their startup process as well, which complicates things. That's another thing to understand, is that water pumps need to be primed. If they lose their prime, then they don't pump, and if they sit long enough without running, they can lose their prime. Ask anybody who's got a 2-inch trash pump. And it can be a real pain to prime a pump again. Let's see. The inevitable collapse of our power grid in March 2019 dialed the problems up to 11, and as a result, water distribution has been extremely erratic. Throughout the year, we've suffered through several days without water, sometimes over a week. Nowadays, we're lucky if we get more than 36 hours of water per week. The excuses have been absurd as it gets, from simple low pressure issues to we haven't been authorized to open the valves for that region yet. Power has become relatively stable in Caracas, with sporadic blackouts and fluctuations in power here and there. This is the capital, after all, the seat of power of this socialist revolution, and it must be kept afloat at all costs. Things are even more dire and more inhumane outside the city's borders. My father tells me that he only gets water for 2 days every 3 months. Daily blackouts that can last 18 hours or more continue to plague other regions of the country with no end in sight. These public utilities woes have long since become part of our daily bread and butter. Well, it's not like you can get those with ease every day here either, but you get my point. It's all been so tiresome and exasperating. Christian K. Caruso is a Venezuelan writer and documents life under socialism. You can follow him on Twitter, so says the article. So I just wanted to read that to y'all and make a couple of pointers here. And, again, we often wonder about what will life be like during SHTF. We have a lot of historical references and some ongoing currently that we can look at right now to get an answer to that. I think one of the reasons that the EMP is such a pet scenario for apocalyptic preparedness, survivalist fiction writers, and such a point of focus for so many preppers is that we know that so much of life is predicated on the flow of electrons, and that we will be kicked back into the Stone Age, or at least a couple hundred years on our human being timeline without electricity. And so it's really critical to have systems in place that function without electricity and to be able to produce your own electricity. And we can get into at another point, maybe we will, the concept that what you stockpile, other people will appropriate, whether it's the government or your community, for the benefit of the whole. So it's not even worth doing that anyway. Well, my answer to that is, and has been for a long time, you should build a community that is so robust and so well prepared and so highly motivated that they don't need to take from you because they've got their own. And the good of the whole is we have a whole group of highly motivated individuals who are all squared away. And then if the .gov comes and decides they're going to take your stuff, they might realize that you're a much harder target than they thought. And a lot of people say, well, they'll just steamroll you. To which I'd say you should look at the U.S. military's doctrine on fighting an insurgency, look at the lines of effort there, and realize that it takes a minimum of 6 years to wage war with insurgents, a minimum of which, and the iron-fisted approach that the military has tried in the 41/42 instances that they've examined throughout history, the iron fist approach has always led to defeat by the force fighting the insurgency, meaning that the insurgency wins. The harder you hit the insurgents, the harder they hit back. And we in this case would be the insurgents if, say, DHS was going around appropriating goods and equipment and materiel. So yes, could they flatten you? If a striker brigade came in, or a drone or an A-10, absolutely. But man, it would highly motivate my neighbors to hit back. So, but that's a different story for a different time. All right, Patreon. Sorry we went long. Shalom and blessings, y'all.